Hey there, fellow cyclists. Have you ever considered building your own bike? Well, I just did that before last Christmas. After countless hours of watching YouTube video, I finally managed to put together my first ever home-built bike. But as you can imagine, there are few bumps along the road. After 6 months of riding, I experienced some concerning moments at times, like when I put the power through the pedal, the headset started creaking a little bit. I could imagine there would be other things I didn't quite get it right during the assembly process. Luckily, my friend David from the Cycle Center kindly offered to take a look at my bike and help me identify what I screwed up. So I hope that we'll be able to fix it so that I can still ride it at home today. If not, I'll just leave it here overnight, right? So the bike is over to you, David. Tell us what you're going to do.
Oh man, we're just going to have a quick look at your full assembly. We're going to have a look at your gearing system. We're going to have a look at your brakes. We're going to have a look at your headset as you complained. And I probably suspect there'll be something down below in a crank or even on your wheel side of the house that we'll have a look at.
All right, thank you so much. So that's off to you now, David. Let's get it rolling.
Let's get it done. You mentioned that you have a creaking sound on your headset.
Yeah, on the headset when I ride more than 400 volt. So when I put power.
Are you out of the saddle or you're in the saddle?
Either, yeah, both of them.
So it's still creaking both
Still
ways?
creaking, yeah.
Rightio. Question, do you have a torque wrench?
I do. Do I use it? Man, you...
And obviously the greasing of the bearings, that was done properly when you put the headset together or not?
Think I did it right?
Rightio. Typically when you get sounds out of areas like your headset, it's bearings that are either not perfectly aligned or not greased properly, or your torque settings on your bolts are not right. So then it tends to move a bit. You may not see it, you may not feel it, but yeah, there's a creaking sound, much like a bottom bracket as well.
Yeah.
If you don't torque it in properly, you don't set it in properly, you'll have those little creaks and bounce to it. And the reason it's coming to the fore when you're putting a lot of power down is that the bike is starting to flex.
Yeah.
If you just cruising along, there's no flex on the bike, you're riding it, the frame is pretty stable, everything's pretty stable. But the moment you hit you mentioned 400 watts because it's obviously something you've been looking at. Yeah. When you put down that amount of power, the bike starts to flex and starts to pick up that creak.
Okay, so what could I do to fix it?
Right, you got to take the headset off, Matt.
That's not a small piece of
yeah. So the headset's got to come off so you can then check. Again, use the correct tools to get it in the correct position, make sure it's greased properly, put it back together again, and then torque it correctly. Make sure all those bits and pieces are done. And then check it. Now the thing is, again, you may be hearing it from here, but it could be coming from there, it could be coming from there. Yeah. That's the thing.
So I was suspecting there was 3 things that I need to loop up. I didn't quite loop it correctly. So do you need to loop the through axle? Do you loop it?
Well, it's going to be a preference thing. I do. As it relates to anything that's moving on the bike, I typically grease up, make sure it's pretty well done. If, like I said, if it's not torqued correctly or there's a little bit of movement and the rubbing noise between the carbon is what you're hearing, or carbon and metal, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, it's just 2 materials of having
friction. Taste that some guys do, at least to the bottom bracket. You put it on, and typically, there we go, you can hear a clicking sound.
Yeah.
Did you hear the click sound as I stepped on it?
Yeah.
So sometimes that could come up with a noise, and that's exactly what you'll be looking for as it relates to the bottom bracket side of the house. If there's anything that's not torqued properly, or it's a bit loose, or a bit faulty, whatever the case may be, it's going to be a problem.
And how do I tell which one? That's why I come to you.
Process of elimination. So you'll start with the ones that's the most common. For instance, on a quick release bike, I get a lot of customers coming and telling me that they hear this creak, they think it's the bottom bracket, and it's actually the front quick release on their wheel that's not tight enough. They don't start there because it doesn't make a lot of sense to them. But that is the part that comes off the most and gets put on the most. So that's where you start. The next part and parcel of it is, believe it or not, your cleats. They clip into your pedals. If they're not tightened down properly, it also makes a clicking sound. So everything that has a moving part that you move quite often, start there. And then you start going to the fixed points like your bottom bracket or your headset or whatever the case may be. Once you've done the elimination and part, and again, it'll come down to me choosing that one or that one. I'm going to go with that one first.
Yeah, because it's most likelihood will be the
correct
bottom bracket.
There's the most power has been put on there. It's got the most wear on it. So you start there and then you move your way up to your head. You can hear a clicking sound. Then you pretty much come, I wouldn't say confident, but I'd give it a 45% that your bottom bracket is where it's at. Then you take the bottom bracket out, grease it, check it, put it back in again. I would say 60% of the time it's just get it torqued up correctly and it'll be fine, but yeah, there is a 40% chance that you'll have to replace the bottom bracket in totality, depending what you want. And then you ride the bike again. If you're still hearing the clicking sound, yeah, it's not the bottom bracket, then you move on to the next bit. Everything on a bike needs to be torqued according to specification. If it's not until spec, you'll always have issues. Tightening pedals as well is a very big thing. A lot of people think about it, but a pedal that's loose does two things. It's going to cross thread your crank, and it'll also cause issues like clicking sounds and those type of things as well. So make sure your pedals are really good, they're well tightened onto the bike, and there's no major issues as it relates to that coming out.
Got a little bit of squeaking on the front brake. What can you say about that?
Ooh, do you have any? Have you got any oil on it? Is there any foreign material stuck on your rotor? Have you cleaned your rotor recently?
No, none of them. Right. None of them above.
Rightio. There's a few things that you need to look at as it relates to squeaking on the brakes. There's definitely some foreign material between your brake pad as well as your disc or your rotor, and that needs to be cleaned off. If it's an oil base, then your pads need to be cleaned, and that's a bit of a process. You can either sand it down with a file, or you can actually clean it with alcohol and let it dry, but the drying process is probably going to be about a day or two, because you've got to get it really dry before you put it back in again. And then your rotor needs to be cleaned as well. Once you've completed that process, you pop it back in again and you're riding and it still squeaks, and you start looking at maybe replacing the pads. There's a lot of throwing your brakes, which is also a dangerous side of the house, because you don't want to be pushing up. Once again, if you climb onto the brakes, you're really in a panic state. Most people don't gradually pull their brakes, you try and grab a handful of it. If you grab a handful of the brakes currently or it fails, you've got no throw, you've got no movement. So grabbing, loosely termed, is too close to your handlebars. It needs to be a bit, probably mid movement. So if you have, I'm going to use this as an arbitrary number, if you have 25 millimeters to move on your handles, at about 12 and a half, you should be grabbing onto your or the brake should be grabbing.
So I think it is progressionally getting worse, because
wear of the brake pad.
The wear of the brake pad, but also I feel that the stretch of the cable could happen as well.
Correct. The former obviously being more prominent than the latter. The stretch of the cable will be a couple of micromillimeters, and it's going to hit equilibrium, and it's not going to do anything further. But the progressive usage of your brakes, it's something that deteriorates as you ride. Much like a tire, you lose rubber, you'll lose brake pads as well. So that's something you need to be checking before you ride each time as well.
Tell me what you found.
So on the derailleur, there was a few things that we need to have a look at. Obviously, it's your high and your low limits. Your high and low limits were out slightly by about half a turn each way. The high side of it doesn't drop to the bottom of the cassette at all. And the second thing you need to consider with that as well is this cable tension.
Can you articulate that a little bit? What does that mean?
Within your system, your derailleur system, you have tension on the cable at all times. So when your derailleur is right at the bottom end of the cassette, or the high gear ratio side of the cassette, there's not a lot of tension on the cable. So if you're going up from whatever speed it is, 11 to the next one up, and you want to go down again, there's not a lot of torque on the system to pull the cable down or to release it. So if you're running a low quality, or you have high bends, high friction cables, that takes quite a little bit of time to move. So then you need to start looking at your cable type. So like an OptiSlick would be ideal for this type of situation. So when you're changing gears up or down, your derailleur actually goes past the initial gear you're going to, and then it vibrates back into position. So once you're changing and you're putting torque on it, your cage does move a tad when you're going up and down. But the slick part of it is doing it while you're stationary, because then you can see what type of performance is coming.
So this is the kind of the worst scenario, because there's no power on the drivetrain, and I don't really feel it when I'm riding, because it's just the power is running through the system.
Yeah, correct. Another thing you need to consider, and I mentioned it earlier, is the cassette type you have on your bike as well. So if your cassette has variant distances between gears, or gear ratios, you're going to have an instance where the chain's not going to slip up to the next gear quite freely, and you're going to have clicking sounds as you go along. You change the specific gearing systems as well. And then obviously the lubrication of said chain. If the lubrication is, if it's well lubricated while
I just a little bit disappointed, actually.
So well lubricated chain, look after mech, and yeah, you should be in a good spot. But the advantage of high quality to low quality is it's quite apparent when you get to bikes like this.
Yeah.
When you're riding an e-bike, or you're riding a city hybrid, or you're riding a commuter, that's not going to make that massive difference because you're running 7/8 speed chains. The gaps are big, they're quite standard. When you're running the smaller ones, you're riding high quality. Yeah, those little increments make a difference.
Incremental difference,
Yes.
you really feel it.
And and you pay well. You get what you pay for.
Yeah.
If you want to pay for a $12 cable, yeah, you're going to get $12 performance. If you want to buy a $25 cable, you're going to get $25.
This set of cable is actually not cheap. It's about $40-50.
Yeah.
It's a high-end set of cable. Yeah.
Correct. And then, like I said, these ones, the stainless steel ones is normal. And then I quite like using OptiSlick. It's a really good cable system.
Yeah.
It really performs well. At the bottom end of your B screw was a bit out, which means your cage was grinding up against the top end of your.
So it's too close?
Yeah, correct. So
it was too close, yeah.
It was too close to the top end, so it was rubbing up against the top end sprocket of your cassette. And on the top end of your movement was, again, your limit screw was about a half a screw out too far. Yeah. So it makes a little bit of a difference. On top of that.
So I thought the B limit screw is going to be 3 mil.
Or approximately,
yeah.
Now you'll get the guys that are pretty precise. It's 3 millimeter on the money, but it's a squishy system. It's much like a tire size as well, so it's also a very squishy system. If you get it aligned correctly and it shifts correctly, you don't have your jockey wheels grinding up against your cassette. Yeah. There's free movement between that and the cassette, and you can get, and it changes quite easily, and there's no grinding. Yeah. You can break a jockey wheel.
Yeah.
You can break a jockey wheel. Your derailleur can then push into your spokes. You can have a catastrophic failure of your wheel. It's quite dangerous. If you come off at high speed or low speed, depending on what you're at, it's gonna leave a mark.
It's gonna have something there.
It's gonna leave a mark, and especially if you're putting down. All right, there's two scenarios. You're going quite quickly. You want to slap down, go around a corner to go get power out. You might fall quite hard if it goes in. Next scenario is if you're going uphill, you're putting a lot of torque down. It's the same thing. You can cause some serious damage.
Derek, so thank you so much of looking at the bike, and I hope I qualify. Or what will you say? What will you say?
You'll get a pass tick on that one. It's pretty well done.
Thanks you so much. I know there is always room for improvement. I hope I didn't screw up too badly this time.
No, you're good.
All right, cool. Now again, thank you so much for your time, and you're helping me to identify a few things. Obviously, there's no catastrophic mechanical issue.
You're very welcome. And no, there isn't.
All right, cool. Hey guys, now if you want to have your bike checked out, or if you run into any issue, and if you're lucky enough to live in the best place on earth, which is in Perth, be sure to come to the cycle center in the city and say hello to David. And then until next time, keep pedaling.